Tonight, we're traveling back in time to a small town in medieval Europe. The streets are quiet, the sky is still dark, and will be for several more hours. Most people in this town are deeply asleep. Farmers, merchants, mothers, children, tucked beneath their blankets. But not everyone. In one of the narrow streets near the center of town, a door opens. A man steps outside into the cold air. He pauses for a moment, looking up at the sky, checking the weather the way he does every morning. Then he goes back inside. He has work to do. His name is Martin. He is a baker, and his day has already begun. Tonight we'll spend some time with him. We'll follow him through his morning and into his day, through the heat of his ovens, the weight of his dough, the quiet rhythms of his trade. That's more than enough for one night. So let yourself get comfortable. Let the day outside settle away. And come with us to a small town in medieval Europe where Martin is already awake and the oven is beginning to glow. Martin wakes before the sun. Before most people in town have turned over in their sleep, he is already sitting up in the dark, swinging his legs over the side of his bed. The room above the bakery is small, a straw mattress, a wooden chest in the corner, a candle on the table that he lights every morning before anything else. The flame is small at first. It steadies. He sits with it for a moment. Outside, the town is completely still. No carts on the road, no voices, just the occasional sound of wind moving through the narrow streets, and somewhere far off, the low sound of an animal shifting in a stable. Martin pulls on his clothes in the candlelight. A linen shirt, a woolen tunic, heavy boots that have been resoled more than once. He moves slowly, the way a man moves when he has done the same thing so many times that his body does it almost on its own. He has been waking at this hour for most of his life. As a boy, he woke because his father woke him. Now he wakes on his own, before the candle, before the cold gets into his bones, at the hour when the rest of the world is still somewhere far away in sleep. He splashes water on his face from a clay bowl on the windowsill. The water is cold. He doesn't react. He picks up his candle and makes his way downstairs. The bakery is on the ground floor. A low-ceilinged room with a stone floor, a heavy wooden work table running along one wall, and at the far end, the oven. The oven is everything in this room. It is built from stone and fired brick, rounded and thick-walled, large enough that Martin can slide a long wooden paddle deep inside it and still have room to work. It takes up nearly a third of the space. In winter, its warmth spreads through the whole building, up through the floorboards and into the room above where Martin sleeps. But right now, in the early morning dark, the oven is cold. Or nearly cold. There are still a few embers from the night before, buried under a layer of ash, holding a little heat the way a coal does when you cover it. Patiently, quietly, waiting. Martin sets his candle on the work table. He looks at the oven for a moment. Then he gets to work. The wood is stacked just outside the back door. Martin has cut and carried most of it himself. Short lengths of oak and beech, split and dried, stored under a low roof to keep off the rain. He knows how each type of wood burns. Oak slow and hot, beech a little faster. He uses both, layering them the way his father taught him. He carries an armful inside and kneels in front of the oven. He pulls back the ash with a long iron tool, uncovering the embers underneath. They glow faintly in the dark, dull orange, almost red, still alive. He places a handful of dry kindling over them and leans down close and blows gently, steadily, the way you would if you didn't want to frighten something away. The embers brighten. A small flame catches the edge of a stick. Then another. Martin sits back and watches it for a moment. There is something satisfying about this part of the morning. The fire either catches or it doesn't. There is nothing to argue with. You do it right, and it takes. You do it wrong, and you start again. This morning, it takes. He begins feeding in the larger pieces of wood, one at a time, not rushing. The fire needs air as much as it needs fuel. He leaves gaps between the pieces, lets the flames move through them, lets the heat build slowly. The oven begins to tick and shift as the stone warms. It always makes that sound in the early morning, a low, settling noise like a house in winter. Martin has heard it so many times he no longer notices it. The way you stop hearing the sound of a river if you live close enough to one. Now comes the waiting. A bread oven cannot be rushed. It needs time. Not just the air inside the chamber, but the stone itself. The walls and floor need to be hot all the way through so that when the bread goes in, it bakes evenly, from all sides at once. This takes an hour, sometimes more. Martin stands by the oven for a little while longer. The warmth is spreading now, reaching out into the room, pushing back the cold of the stone floor, the cold of the dark outside the windows. He holds his hands toward it. The town is still sleeping. The fire is going. The day has begun. The flour comes first. Martin lifts a heavy sack from the corner of the room and carries it to the work table. He measures out the flour by feel as much as by eye. A practiced scoop, and another, and another. The pale dust rising faintly in the candlelight and settling on his hands and forearms and the front of his tunic. He makes a well in the center of the mound. Into it goes the water. Not cold, not hot, but somewhere in between. The temperature you find by holding your wrist near it and waiting. Then the salt. A careful amount. Martin has made this judgment every morning for years, and he makes it now without stopping to think. And then the starter. This is the part that connects this morning to every morning before it. The starter is a small portion of old dough kept back from a previous batch, alive with the slow work of natural fermentation. It is what makes the bread rise, what gives it its flavor. Slightly sour, slightly complex. Martin's starter is old. He couldn't tell you exactly how old. It was given to him when he took over the bakery. Passed along the way, tools are passed along without ceremony. He feeds it regularly, keeps it in a covered crock near the warmth of the oven. On cold mornings, he checks on it the way you check on something small and alive that depends on you. He works it into the flour and water, folding it in, beginning to bring the mixture together. Then the kneading begins. He pushes the heels of his hands into the dough and leans his weight forward, stretching it away from him across the table. Then he folds it back, turns it, and pushes again. The motion is slow and steady and requires his whole body, not just his hands, but his shoulders, his back, the muscles along his sides that have grown firm from years of this work. Dough resists at first. It is stiff and uneven, but with time and pressure it begins to change. It becomes smoother, more elastic. It starts to push back against his hands in a way that feels almost alive, springy and cooperative, like something that has decided to work with him rather than against him. Martin kneads without hurrying. There is nothing to hurry toward. The oven is still heating. The town is still dark. The only sound is the soft rhythm of his hands on the dough and the occasional shift of the fire, and somewhere outside a bird that has woken earlier than it should have. His arms ache by the end of it. They always ache. He has stopped expecting otherwise. He shapes the dough into a round and covers it with a cloth. Now it needs to rest, to rise slowly in the warmth of the bakery, the starter doing its quiet work, the dough swelling gradually over the next hour or two into something lighter than it was. Outside, the sky is beginning to change. Not light yet, but no longer entirely dark. A faint shift at the edges, almost impossible to see, the kind of change you only notice if you have been awake long enough to watch for it. Martin notices. He has been watching for it every morning for most of his life. The church bells ring for the first time just before dawn. Martin hears them the way he always hears them, not as a surprise, but as a confirmation, a sound that tells him the morning is moving along the way it should. He pauses for a moment, listening, then goes back to what he was doing. The dough is rising under its cloth. The oven is nearly ready. Outside, the town is beginning to stir. It happens slowly. A shutter opening somewhere down the street. The sound of footsteps on the cobblestones. Unhurried, a little heavy. Someone who has not been awake long. A dog that barks once and then goes quiet. These are the sounds of a town remembering itself, finding its shape again after the long stillness of the night. Martin's apprentice arrives not long after the bells. He is a boy of about 14, the son of a tanner who lives 2 streets over. He arrives each morning looking slightly dazed, his hair uncombed, his boots not always laced properly. And Martin says nothing about any of this because he was the same at that age. The boy's name is Peter. He comes in, looks at the state of the bakery, and gets to work without being told. The boy is still learning, still clumsy with certain things, but he pays attention. He watches. He asks questions at the right moments and stays quiet at the others. Martin shows him how to test the oven. You take a small handful of flour and toss it inside. If it scorches and turns black, the oven is too hot. If it browns slowly and evenly over a few seconds, the oven is ready. Peter tosses in the flour. They both watch. It browns evenly. Martin nods. They begin loading the bread. The loaves go in on a long wooden paddle. A peel it is called, slid carefully into the oven one at a time, placed with enough space between them to expand. It requires a steady hand. You commit to the motion or you don't. Hesitate halfway and the loaf slides off and the whole thing is a mess. Peter has dropped 2 loaves this way in the past month. He does not drop one this morning. Martin says nothing, but he notices. While the first batch bakes, the town outside continues to wake up. Carts on the road, voices calling across a courtyard, the heavy bell of the church again, marking the hour. Somewhere nearby, someone is frying something, and the smell drifts faintly through the gaps around the bakery door. The first customers appear not long after. A woman who comes every morning for 2 loaves of dark rye bread, which she carries home wrapped in a cloth without saying very much. An older man who buys a small loaf and stands just outside the door eating part of it before he has even walked away. Martin serves each of them in turn. He is not a talkative man, but he is not unfriendly. He knows most of his regular customers by name, knows their habits, knows who wants their bread well done and who prefers it pulled from the oven a few minutes early. He wraps and hands over and takes the coins and wraps again. Peter sweeps the flour from the floor between batches. The oven continues its steady work. By mid-morning, the street outside is fully alive. Market stalls open, the voices of traders mixing with the sounds of animals and wheels, and children running between the legs of adults who tell them to slow down without any real expectation that they will. Martin watches it all from the doorway for a moment. The town has woken up around him while he was working. It always does. He goes back inside. There is more bread to make. Martin belongs to a guild. Most trades in a medieval town have one. Butchers, weavers, tanners, blacksmiths. Each trade has its own organization, its own rules, its own way of doing things. The Bakers' Guild is one of the older ones. It has been around longer than anyone in town can remember. Martin joined as a young man after his years as an apprentice were finished. It was not really a choice. You joined or you did not bake. The guild has its benefits. If Martin falls ill and cannot work, there are arrangements that can be made. If a supplier tries to sell him flour that has been cut with chalk dust or sawdust, and this does happen, the guild has ways of addressing it. But the guild also has its demands. The price of bread in this town is not set by Martin. It is set by the authorities, adjusted from time to time depending on the price of grain and the size of the harvest. Martin charges what he is told to charge. The weight of his loaves is also regulated. A loaf of a given price must weigh a certain amount. If the price of grain goes up, the loaf can be made a little smaller. If it comes down, the loaf must be larger. The baker does not get to simply decide. Officials come around periodically to check, carrying weights and scales. Martin has always been careful about this. He weighs his loaves with the same iron scale his father used, hung from a hook above the work table. The pan on one side, the loaf on the other, the little iron weights arranged along the bar until the whole thing balances. Sometimes, to be safe, he adds a small extra piece of dough to a loaf before it goes in the oven. It disappears in the baking, absorbed into the crust. But it means the finished loaf comes out a little heavier than required. A small precaution, a habit picked up from his father, who picked it up from his. Peter watches him do this one morning and asks why. Martin thinks about how to explain it. Better to give a little more than a little less, he says finally. Peter nods as though this applies to more than just bread. It does. The guild meets several times a year in a low hall near the market square. The meetings cover the usual business: supply problems, changes to regulations, the occasional new apprentice being formally registered. The guild master is a heavy-set man named Jeffrey, who has been doing the job for many years and shows no signs of stopping. Martin does not always agree with Jeffrey, but he respects the structure. The rules feel like a burden sometimes, but they are also, in their way, a kind of stability. Martin has always found something reassuring about a world with clear expectations. You make the bread, you weigh it, you charge the right price, you do it again tomorrow. Sometime in the middle of the morning, Martin stops. Not for long, 20 minutes perhaps, long enough to eat something, to sit down for the first time since he woke up, to let his arms rest. He eats simply. A heel of bread from the first batch of the morning, still slightly warm. A piece of hard cheese kept wrapped in cloth on a shelf near the back. He washes it down with ale. Weak ale, more grain and water than anything else. The kind that leaves you clear-headed, but takes the edge off the thirst. He sits on a low stool near the back door. Peter eats standing up, the way young people tend to, as though sitting down fully would be a concession to tiredness he is not yet willing to make. The bakery cat sits near the flour sacks and watches them both. There are 2 cats. There have always been cats in this bakery. A bakery with flour and grain draws mice, and cats draw fewer mice than any trap Martin has ever tried. But he has grown fond of them in the way you grow fond of anything that shares your daily life for long enough. The older cat is large and gray, and almost entirely indifferent to Martin except at mealtimes. The younger one is small and tortoise-shelled and follows him around the bakery in the mornings in a way that he finds, though he would not say this out loud, rather pleasant company. He gives them both a small piece of cheese. Martin is married. His wife's name is Agnes. She helps in the bakery on the busiest mornings, moving between the front and the back with the easy efficiency of someone who has learned a trade by proximity rather than by formal instruction. She handles many of the customers herself, knows the regulars as well as Martin does, and has a memory for faces and names that he has always admired and never quite matched. They have 2 children, a daughter of 9 and a son of 6. The daughter is already beginning to help with small tasks, carrying things, watching the front of the shop when both parents are occupied in the back. The son is mostly underfoot, appearing at odd moments with questions that have nothing to do with bread, and then disappearing again before anyone has fully answered them. In the evenings, after the second baking is done and the oven has been banked for the night, the family eats together. A thick pottage usually, vegetables and grains simmered together, sometimes with a little salt pork for flavor. Dark bread, more ale. On good days, something small and extra. An egg, a piece of river fish, something sweet made with honey. The children talk more than Martin does. Agnes asks him how the day went. He says it went fine. This is almost always what he says. She has stopped expecting a longer answer, which suits them both. After the meal, the children are put to bed and Martin sits by the fire for a while. The cats arrange themselves near the warmth. The fire settles into itself. The sounds of the town outside grow quieter, one by one, until there is not much left to hear. He does not stay up long. He never does. In a few hours, long before the sun rises, the candle will be lit again. Martin goes to bed. The town looks different depending on when you are standing in it. Martin has stood in it through every season for most of his life. and he has come to know each one the way you know the different moods of a person you have lived with for a long time. Spring comes slowly. It announces itself not all at once, but in small increments. A morning slightly less cold than the one before it. A smell in the air that was not there last week. The mud in the streets softening from the hard, frozen ruts of winter into something that gives a little underfoot. Martin notices a change in his flour first. The new grain from the autumn harvest has been sitting in storage through the winter, drying, settling. By spring, it mills differently. The flour is finer, the dough a little easier to work, the bread a slightly better color. Martin cannot always explain why this is. He just knows it from experience. The days are getting longer. In winter, Martin does much of his work by candlelight. But as spring comes on, the light arrives earlier each morning, pushing in through the small windows, reaching the work table by the time the second batch of dough is ready. It lifts something in him, that light. He would not describe it that way, but it does. Summer is the hardest season to work in. The oven that warms the bakery so comfortably in February becomes something else entirely in July. By mid-morning on a hot summer day, the air near the oven shimmers. Sweat runs down Martin's back before he has been working an hour. Peter finds reasons to stand near the door whenever he can. Martin says nothing about this. He does the same thing when no one is watching. The town in summer is crowded and loud. Travelers pass through more frequently, merchants moving between towns, pilgrims on longer journeys, people whose names and destinations Martin will never know. They stop at the bakery sometimes, buying a loaf for the road, eating it standing up in the street before moving on. Martin watches them go. He has never traveled far from this town himself. But the oven needs to be fed. The dough needs to be made. The town needs its bread. And this, when he is honest with himself, is not something he resents. It is simply who he is. Some people move through the world, others stay in one place and keep things going. Martin is the second kind. Autumn is Martin's favorite season. He has never told anyone this. It is not the kind of thing that comes up in conversation. The harvest comes in September and October, and with it, the new grain. Fresh flour from a recent harvest has a quality that is difficult to describe. The dough made from it rises faster, bakes into bread with a crust that catches the light a certain way when it comes out of the oven. Every harvest is slightly different. Every year the grain comes in with its own character, shaped by that year's weather and soil and luck. Martin adjusts by feel, finding the new rhythm this particular flour requires. But there is always flour. There is always bread to be made. The town smells of wood smoke in the autumn evenings. Leaves on the street outside the bakery door. The market winding down earlier each day as the light fades faster. Martin carries wood in from the stack outside and thinks, without meaning to, that he should order more before the real cold comes. And then winter. The sky goes white and stays white for weeks at a time. Snow fills the gaps between the cobblestones and piles against the base of the walls. The town goes quiet. Not silent. There are still carts and voices and the daily sounds of a place that does not stop. But the quality of the noise is different. More muffled, more careful, as though everyone has agreed to move a little more slowly until this is over. Inside the bakery, it is warm. This is the one season when the oven's heat is entirely welcome, when Martin stands close to it without discomfort, when Peter stops drifting toward the door and does his work in the warmest part of the room without being asked. Martin wakes in the dark, which is nothing new, but in winter the dark is deeper and the cold outside the blankets is sharper. There is a moment every morning, brief but real, where he lies still for just a second longer than usual before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Then he gets up. He goes downstairs. He lights the fire. Outside, the snow is still falling. The oven begins to warm, and the smell of bread, the first batch already in and baking, begins to drift up through the floorboards and into the quiet, cold rooms above. Warm and familiar. The same smell it has always been. The same smell it will be tomorrow. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from this work. Not the tiredness of a single hard day, which fades with a night's sleep and leaves no trace by morning. Something slower than that. Something that accumulates over months and years and settles into the body the way damp settles into old stone. Gradually, quietly, until one day you notice it has always been there. Martin's hands tell the story most clearly. They are broad and calloused, the skin thickened along the palms from years of kneading. The knuckles are permanently dry, cracked in winter. There are small scars here and there, burns from the edge of the oven door or the handle of the peel. He barely notices new burns anymore. They happen, they heal, they leave their small marks, and the hands continue. His back aches by midday with a dull persistence he has learned to work through rather than around. He straightens up when he can, rolls his shoulders, presses his fists into the small of his back in a way that helps a little and then stops helping. He does not complain about any of this. Agnes has her own exhaustions. Peter is young enough that the work has not yet accumulated in him the way it has in Martin. The customers want their bread and their change, not a report on the state of the baker's lower back. And so Martin carries it quietly, the way most people carry the ordinary difficulties of their working lives. Not heroically, not with resignation, just matter-of-factly, the way you carry anything that has simply become part of what your days are made of. The flour is everywhere, no matter how carefully Martin works, no matter how thoroughly Peter sweeps. The flour finds its way into every corner of the bakery and beyond. It is in the fabric of his clothes, in the lines of his face. Agnes once said, not unkindly, that she could find her way to the bakery blindfolded just by following the smell of flour. Martin thought about this for a moment. He supposed she was right. He sleeps well. This is one of the genuine gifts of the trade. He has heard of people who lie awake at night turning their worries over and over, unable to quiet their minds. This has never been a problem for him. He is asleep within minutes of his head finding the pillow. His body simply will not allow anything else. There is too much work to do tomorrow. Peter is not the first apprentice Martin has trained. There was a boy before him, the son of a carpenter from the east side of town. A serious boy, quiet, methodical. who never needed to be told the same thing twice. He finished his years with Martin and went on to open his own bakery in a town 2 days' journey away. Martin heard from him once, a brief message carried by a traveling merchant saying that things were going well. He thinks of that boy occasionally. Before him there was another, and before that another still. A whole quiet procession of young men who passed through this bakery over the years, each arriving slightly dazed and clumsy, each leaving knowing something they did not know before. This is one of the ways a trade moves through time, not through books, through hands, through mornings spent standing at the same work table, watching the same motions repeated until they become familiar, then automatic. Through the particular way Martin holds the peel when he slides it into the oven. A slight angle that took him years to develop and that he has never been able to explain in words but can demonstrate in a single movement. Peter is beginning to develop his own version of that angle. Martin has noticed this without saying anything about it. Martin learned to bake in this same bakery. His father ran it before him. He spent his childhood in the room behind the shop, falling asleep to the sound of the oven settling, waking to the smell of the first batch of the morning. When his father's hands began to fail, a stiffness in the joints that came on slowly over several years, Martin took over the heavier work without being asked. They worked alongside each other for a few years like that. Then his father stepped back further, then further still. And one morning, Martin realized without any ceremony or announcement that the bakery was his now. His father lived for several more years after that, coming downstairs occasionally to watch the work without commenting on it. Martin found this comfortable rather than awkward. Having him there was like having the building itself watching, the familiar presence of something that knew the rhythms of the place better than anyone. The years accumulate in a bakery the way flour accumulates, gradually, without drama, until one day you look around and realize that a great deal of it has settled, and there is no single moment you can point to when it happened. Martin's daughter has started asking questions about the starter. How old is it? What would happen if it died? Whether you could make a new one or whether it would be different. Martin tells her the starter is old, that you could make a new one but it would be different, because a starter carries something of every batch of bread ever made with it, a history of flour and water and time that cannot simply be recreated from scratch. She thinks about this for a long moment. Then she goes back to what she was doing. Martin watches her for a second longer than necessary. There are mornings when he stands at the work table and feels briefly, and without being able to name it, the presence of everyone who has stood there before him. His father, his father's father, whom he never met, but whose name was also Martin. The table itself is old enough to have been used by both of them. Thick oak, worn smooth along the front edge where generations of hands have rested. Martin runs his hand along the surface, sometimes not thinking about it. Just the habit of a man who knows a piece of wood the way he knows his own kitchen. The town changes slowly around him. New buildings go up, old ones come down. The guildmaster changes eventually. The church gets a new bell, slightly lower in pitch than the old one. and it takes Martin several weeks to stop noticing the difference. But the bread stays more or less the same flour, the same water, the same salt, the same starter kept alive through all of it, the same dark mornings, the same first light of the oven catching in the early hours. The town is quiet again. It happens the same way it always does, gradually and then all at once. The market stalls close up one by one. The voices in the street thin out. The children disappear indoors. The light fades from the sky in slow stages until the deep, settled dark of a medieval town at night takes over. No lamps in the street, no light from windows except the faint orange glow of a fire seen through a shutter. Martin closes the bakery door. He stands in the quiet of the room for a moment. The work table has been scrubbed. The floor has been swept. The flour sacks are tied and stacked in the corner. The peel hangs on its hook. The oven has been banked for the night, the fire brought down to a low, steady heat, enough to keep the stone warm through the dark hours, enough that tomorrow morning the embers will still be there when he reaches in and uncovers them. Peter has gone home. The cats are somewhere in the back of the bakery, present in the way cats are present. Not quite there, not quite gone. Martin goes upstairs. The children are in bed. Agnes is sitting near the fire with some mending in her lap, and she looks up when he comes in. They exchange a few words about the day. Nothing much. A customer who came late and wanted more than was left. The flour delivery that is due tomorrow. Whether the younger cat has been eating enough. The fire burns low. Martin sits for a while. Not long. He can feel the tiredness in his back, in his hands, in the particular heaviness behind his eyes that means the day has used him up in the way a good day should. He does not fight it. He goes to bed. The town outside is still. The dog somewhere in the distance. The sound of wind in the narrow street below the window. The creak of the building settling into the cold of the night. The same sound it makes every night. The same sound it was making before Martin was born and will make long after. He closes his eyes. And here is where the story could end. A man asleep, a town at rest, an oven holding its warmth in the dark. But it doesn't end here, not really, because somewhere in the hours before dawn, while the town is still deep in sleep, something will shift in Martin. Not an alarm, not a sound, just the quiet knowledge of a body that has done this long enough to know, without being told, that it is time. His eyes will open, the room will be dark. He will lie still for just a moment, one breath, two, and then he will swing his legs over the side of the bed and reach for his clothes and make his way downstairs in the dark. The embers will be there, buried under their ash, waiting. The flour will be in its sacks. The water will be in its jug. And Martin will do what Martin does, what his father did, what the man before his father did, on a morning very much like every other morning, in a small bakery in a small town, while the rest of the world sleeps. He will light the fire, he will make the dough, he will bake the bread. The town will wake up, and the bread will be there, the way it always is, warm and heavy and smelling of the oven, sitting on the shelf behind the counter, waiting for the first customer of the day. The door will open, the town will begin again, and somewhere in the back of the bakery, Martin will already be working on the next batch. The way he always does, the way he always will. Good night.